In a city driven by politics and deadlines, it was time to get away.
Are you ready for my world?
This fall, with the hopes of thousands, two men will risk everything to bring ASA to LA.
Larry, you're going the wrong way, man.
I knew that.
On October 31st, ASA's Going Hollywood. From the people that brought you the ASA annual meetings 1 through 48 and the future of aging services conferences comes ASA 2010. Starring Michael Sandel, Edward James Olmos, Paula Zahn, and the Zimmers. Also starring Bob Newhart, Vicki Lawrence, and John Pinette. Be part of the action. Don't miss the excitement. Wynn Marshall, Larry Minix. Be there when LA gets its ASA on.
Larry, are you ready for this?
I was born ready.
ASA 2010, showing only at the Los Angeles Convention Center. The journey begins October 31st, 2010.
You lost me when you started driving away in the car.
Yeah, can't we just send an email that says join us in LA for the 2010 ASA annual meeting?
Yes, I like that idea. And then we can put a little smiley face at the end of it. Yeah,
I like that smiley face idea. That's actually has a lot of legs, you know. It's really easy, you know. It actually works.
My name is Corrine Sawyer. This is 086-D, Resident Empowerment, the key to excellence in aging service. Let me start by introducing the panel who will speak to you today, I think. I'm Corrine Holt Sawyer. I'm the president of the Resident Council at Carlsbad by the Sea, a front porch community here in Southern California. In my other life, I was an English professor teaching mainly Shakespeare, eventually a college administrator, and a novelist. I wrote murder mysteries, set quaintly enough, in a retirement community. You may or may not have read them. It really doesn't matter. I'm now an official has-been as a novelist. On my right, Dr. Ray Killeen, who's the chair of our Resident Health Committee, and in his other life, he was an internist here in Los Angeles. Mary Beth Tompayne is next. She chairs the Residents Legislative Committee for us at Carlsbad by the Sea and is a past president of our Resident Council. She's the resident member of the California Continuing Care Advisory Committee, and in her career, a management consultant to not-for-profit organizations. Next along, Jack Cumming, who chairs the Residents Finance Committee at Carlsbad by the Sea for our council, and he's a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. And on the far right, Roberta Jacobson, president of Front Porch Communities and Services, very active in industry affairs and direction. They don't say direction of what, but certainly direction of us, and a worthy overseer, I must say. This all began in a very small way as a survey. What happened was that we redecorated the main lobby at Carlsbad by the Sea, and there was a strident, sometimes strident, division of opinion among residents about whether the redecoration had been good or bad. I didn't like it, but one day when I was holding forth colorfully as usual, I was speaking to the chair of the Interior Decor Committee for the Residents Association, and I said, loosely, as I'm wont to do from time to time, well, nobody likes it. And she bristled a little bit and said, well, I like it, and everybody I know likes it. And I really had to stop and think. Here I was, president of the Residents Association, the Resident Council, and I apparently didn't know what my constituency thought. Wouldn't it be nice to actually ask them what they thought about this and, in fact, a number of other issues? And so I talked it over with several of my friends and several of the council members, and we decided to do a survey. Now, you may wonder why another survey, since the resident satisfaction survey theoretically should take care of that, but we don't like the resident satisfaction survey very much. It talks to us in the most general of terms that could apply to anywhere in the United States and don't apply to us and our problems. And we don't like the way it's graded. You know how they grade those things. Anything that isn't a negative is a positive. And yet, for us, there's a whole gray area of neutrality in the middle. People who feel this way and that way, who are ambivalent. People who don't know and don't care. And we don't want that graded as a positive. We don't want to think of that as a plus ourselves. So we were going to put together our own survey. Jack will tell you a lot more about how the survey came into being and what we did. But we felt fairly confident that we'd get a good response, as we did, because nothing we geezers like better than giving our opinion, and second, being sure that it's heard. We put together a survey with a subcommittee made up primarily of former academics, because one thing academics do is test and take tests and take surveys and make tests. So we felt confident that we could manage the language to keep it neutral, to keep from putting anything in the survey that was personal, to keep from riding hobby horses or waving banners, pet peeves. We felt we could take a positive approach and frame the questions, the statements positively rather than negatively. And we felt that we had to let the results speak for themselves. If we didn't like them, well, it's just a survey after all. And a survey is not a scientific test. It is a survey of opinion. We made sure that everybody in management knew what we were going to do, and I have to tell you, they were slightly apprehensive. And I suppose we sounded like a bunch of activists out to make trouble, didn't we? But we weren't, not really. In 2009, we had a 2-page survey. That was the survey, and those were the items. Now, I'm not going over them in detail. I'm going to let you read that for yourself. But we learned from that. This year, we had just 1 page. And people were much happier with a 1-page survey. They didn't like having to turn the... In fact, a number of surveys were turned in without the 2nd page done at all. Yes?
You have the copies of that. We can't read that.
I understand. There are hard copies at the door.
Somebody talks about while you're talking and we can look.
It's not germane. I'll tell you later.
Jack says he'll clear that all up for you when he gets up to speak. Let's see if he does. Let's take a a sample question from the survey. We asked residents if they liked to live at Carlsbad by the Sea, and we got an overwhelming plus on that. People really enjoyed it. They might complain, they might carp, they might grouse about single issues, but they loved being where they were. And that was something positive. This is the 2009 result on 4 particular questions. Is CBTS clean and well kept? The blue is favorable, the green is unfavorable, and the white is neutral. That is to say, could be yes, could be no, or I don't know and I don't care, which I don't believe. The second question is CBTS is well maintained and repairs are made promptly, efficiently, and effectively. And again, very positive scores, very small negative, really. We were in the midst of a changeover in our maintenance division then. And third question, that's a sample. I would recommend Carlsbad by the Sea for people who are still vigorous and healthy. I tried to get the little green light, and I got Roberta's head instead, so I better be careful. And last, we asked about the food service. One of the things that was on the sales brochure when we went to Carlsbad by the Sea was that we would have luxury quality service, food service. Do you agree that the food service is luxury quality? And again, we got strong positive responses. These favorables far outweighed the unfavorables when they came. This year, we asked it in a different way. We asked a single question. I'm proud to live at Carlsbad by the Sea. I think perhaps proud was a difficult word. Perhaps we should have used something else. But look, we got a 93% agreement. Strongly agreed, 62% agreed. All that green is positive. One person was cross because his mail wasn't delivered on time or something. There were still areas of controversy. I've got to tell you, my pet peeve, the remodel, we're still having trouble with it. In 2009, my chair of interior decor was right. Opinion was split. About 42 negative, about 41 positive. All the rest somewhere in the middle. But this year, we asked it in a different way. Notice the difference. The remodeling controversy continues, and this year green is positive, and that's only 18%. Negative is 30%. Oh, more than that, excuse me. More than 50%. I'm going to tell you that will change again next year when we give our survey, and the reason it will change is we've had a remodel of our resource room, that is the library, and of the large meeting room we call the Rochambeau room, and those remodels are highly successful, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say everybody agrees with me. Although, as you're well aware, although it came as a shock to me, not everybody agrees with me all the time. Altogether, the questions revealed that residents find financial matters very puzzling and very challenging, that they're glad to be living in a CCRC, and that they will recommend a CCRC for others, especially their CCRC. Health is a centerpiece of resident interest, and Dr. Colleen, who is chairing our health committee, will talk about that. Resident involvement can facilitate service performance, and Mary Beth Tompayne will explain that to you. Jack Cumming, as I told you, will talk about survey specifics, and then we're going to ask Roberta Jacobson to give the management perspective, because indeed we did share all our results with management from first to last, all warts and all. Even when we said we didn't like something they did, we told them about it. And that wasn't very often, I'm pleased to say. Ray?
Good morning. The purpose of our presentation this morning is to demonstrate that with positive goals in mind, a great deal of tact and diplomacy, and much patience, the residents of an independent living retirement community can influence and bring about positive changes in that community. Now let me start with a little bit of biography. I am a retired physician. I specialized in internal medicine here in Los Angeles, just up Wilshire Boulevard at the Good Samaritan Hospital for 36 years from 1960 to 1996. After retirement, my wife and I moved to San Diego County. In May of 2007, we moved into Carlsbad by the Sea. Shortly thereafter, I was appointed chairman of the Health Committee. In the latter part of 2007, we instituted a monthly lecture series entitled Ask Your Doctor, which has been very successful. Some of the topics we discussed were hypertension and congestive heart failure, diabetes, urinary incontinence, osteoarthritis, chronic pain management. And after the talks, we would have the Ask Your Doctor session where we were open to any questions on an informal basis about anything. One of my favorite topics was the anatomy of dreams. We also covered power of attorney for financial matters and medical power of attorney for health care with advice from both lawyers and physicians. We brought in outside speakers for macular degeneration, heart disease, skin cancer, and even an 86-year-old columnist from the North County Times newspaper who is an expert in elder care, and she spoke on the challenges of fear. The Health Committee also introduced the refrigerator magnetized vial of life emergency information packet, which was inaugurated by the San Diego County Aging and Independent Services. We revised their information form and distribute annually a new form each October to keep the information current and up to date. This handy packet can be quickly pulled off the refrigerator door for emergency medical technician, ambulance personnel, or any person transporting a resident to a medical facility. The Health Committee also instituted...
I think maybe I better start this thing. Cut it down.
The Health Committee instituted a hand disinfectant use available to all residents prior to entering the community dining room. This occurred in the early days of 2009 as the H1N1 swine influenza swept across California. All residents are encouraged to receive the flu vaccine annually. Carlsbad by the Sea became a smoke-free campus in 2010 for the first time in its 12 years existence. All of these activities have helped to bring the Carlsbad by the Sea management and residents closer together in a cooperative mode for other endeavors. In early 2009, one of our residents spent several weeks in our care center nursing unit, following which he documented his experience in a letter to management. With this impetus, the Health Committee and the Resident Council suggested to management the need for refurbishing the care center to make it more efficient, comfortable, and home-like, as well as up to date. It also is 12 years old. Management agreed, and a committee was formed consisting of the executive director of Carlsbad by the Sea, the maintenance and environmental manager, the head nurse, and 4 residents. This committee worked for 9 months to plan and design a prototype double room with bath to bring together color, design, materials, furnishings, and equipment to make what we thought would be a suitable prototype. Resident-generated art was made available for each furnished room. At the same time, another joint management and resident committee, the Philanthropy Committee, worked on a plan to raise money to assist the project. So financing was a joint venture with management contributing capital funds for structure and equipment and residents contributing to enhance a home-like atmosphere. The prototype was completed in April of 2010. The beds were occupied by resident patients, and their response was extremely positive and appreciative of the upgraded prototype. Further refurbishing has progressed through 2010, but completion will take much longer, as work is completed only when the rooms become available, as the patient census must be kept as close as possible to 100%. We recognize this from the start, and it will likely be late 2011 or even 2012 before the entire unit has been upgraded. A national accreditation organization, My Interview, examined over 4,000 nursing centers across the United States, and our care center at Carlsbad by the Sea was included in the top 10%. This has been a project of complete cooperation and transparency between management and the residents. Everyone has gained. We have worked together with respect for one another, and closer relationships have prospered. We hope that this will continue in the future as we move forward with our next project, which is refurbishing of our assisted living area. Thank you.
I'm here as having worked with not-for-profit organizations for about, I guess I'm in shock when I say 50 years. Early in my time of that, I was an absolute volunteer while my husband and I raised our 4 sons. And when I was talked into helping start a brand new hospital and get it built, and I agreed to go on their professional staff with the understanding that I would do it and be able to see that the hospital was functioning, and I would do it for that length of time. And then after that, I found I was in the management consulting business because people would call me and say, "Can you help us with this?" And then by pure chance, I was asked to do interim work and go into not-for-profits that were in trouble, and I became either the interim CEO, president, or executive director, depending on the title they used. And it was a wonderful use of my skills. I was particularly fortunate in my experiences, my life experiences before that, and it became possible for me to do because my youngest son was in college. And so I would go into a community and live there and work for 3 to 9 months to turn it around. And I learned a lot of things. And I think that most of the times I was hired because of my management skills in both finance and personnel, but found that after a short time, people were calling me because somehow I was able to work with difficult stakeholders. And the things that I learned about difficult people being considered difficult people were that often they were kind of a threat to the professional staff because they asked lots of questions or they made statements, very definitive statements. But I also found they were thinking people and often did not have factual information. It could be the most powerful individuals to bring about change if change was needed. And if changes are needed, they will be the leaders of the change because they have been part of the problem solving. I'd like to share with you some of the types of things that I would come into. I often would come into an organization and the board and perhaps some other organization would think everything was fine, the United Way or whatever it was. And I, in a short time, would find that they had were spending more than they were taking in. And nobody seemed to know it. So this meant, as you can imagine, some real changes were going to be needed. And I found by using the people who were part of the program, whatever it was, volunteers, board members, and staff, and I use the technique of storyboarding pretty much, but you can do brainstorming or focus groups if that's what you want to do. But I tried to get involved everybody because I found even the position that was not a management position but a staff person or an active volunteer often really knew what the problems were, but nobody ever asked them. And you get from them the reality of what are the needs. And slowly you get to a point where you set some priorities. What I would do would be to collect factual data and share it with everyone. And most of the organizations I went into were 501c3s, and so that I felt that this information was something that everyone should have, and it was not anything to keep secret. And I made that data available to everyone who was going to be part of trying to look at what do we do next. And I had open sessions with all the people affected by the challenges that were facing them. I used ideas generated to determine most important items with that group. We did the rating together. I didn't do it for them because I wasn't going to be there forever. They needed to be a real part of that involvement. And those responsible for implementing changes then set determined priorities, resources that were going to be needed, and reasonable timelines to get it done. And then we looked at really trying to be sure that there would be provide skilled management. So I often help the organization find somebody to replace me so that they could carry on the program. But the people who were involved, both stakeholders of all levels, had been part of the program, so they all knew it. And there weren't any mysteries. And I think this industry, our continuing care industry, is facing huge challenges. And I'm amazed at the skills of people who are living in those facilities. And I think if the staffs and the residents can work together, they can really bring great change in an easy way because they know what they are doing and why they need to make the changes to be better and provide things. So that I think that if you involve the people with the knowledge of their decisions, they'll make great sacrifice in order to be able to achieve a goal that everyone has agreed is important. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I really appreciate your getting up so early in the morning and coming out for this crack of dawn session to hear from some residents, which is a bit of a change. Since I'm the actuary, the technical development of the survey fell to me. I don't know, how many of you know what an actuary is? All right, quite a few. That's good because this industry is heavily influenced by demographics and actuarial judgment. And I notice we've got 3 actuaries presenting in the exhibit hall, so I hope you'll all go visit them. But I thought I'd start with something that I was just triggered in my mind sitting here listening. There's a session on your program called The New Face of Normal, implying that there's a change coming. And everybody knows that the industry is going through a transition. And it's easy to say, well, it's just due to economic setbacks. People are having trouble selling their homes, so they can't afford the entrance fees. But there may be, excuse me, a new generation of residents coming. Today's generation, some of them were around during the Depression. And during the Depression, you didn't question your boss if you wanted to keep your job. And keeping a job was a mighty good thing to do. And then they went on and they went to war. And it wasn't a good idea to question your commanding officer. So we have a generation now in these communities who are very attuned to respecting people in authority. But there's a change coming because the new generation, and maybe I and my wife and people like us begin to represent that generation. We came along after Watergate, after women's equality began to be recognized, after integration, after Vietnam, after it was obvious that people in authority weren't always right. So that, I think, will be the new face of normal. And the industry may need to rethink its proposition, because it may be that the proposition, you buy it, we own it, won't carry forward into the future. People may question that, and I think it's going to call for all of the creative energies that all of you have. You're such a talented group of people to address that challenge moving forward. Anyway, one of the evidences of change is the use of PowerPoint. This may be the only session you go to which isn't completely crafted and outlined by PowerPoints throughout, because we come from an era when people still stood up in front of a microphone and spoke without a cheat sheet, more or less. I've got a few notes down here. But anyway, our aim was to gain constructive information from our residents to better inform our resident council. You can't manage what you don't measure. And so for the resident council to be able to manage the expectations of residents, we needed some way of measuring what they were thinking. So this was a way of developing a means for doing that. Now, there are a number of reasons why someone might want to have a survey in a community like ours. One is compliance. California law requires a resident survey. Nobody likes to be coerced to do something. So if you're coerced to do it, you're going to try to do it as minimally as you can. Another one might be to get support for your marketing program. And you can do that by asking questions in a certain way. I saw something recently that if you ask questions about compassion, you tend to elicit more positive responses. So there are ways of crafting surveys to accomplish that end. Another purpose might be to act as a voice for residents. And lastly, to identify areas needing attention. So we got 4 things. Not surprisingly, residents are more interested in the last, while the provider's interest may be in the first. Now, I want to, since Ray Colleen mentioned my Intervision, and the survey that we use for the independent living residents is not the My Intervision. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. I don't want to say what the firm is, but we felt that we could do a survey that had a little better integrity than what the regular survey had, principally because it was scored on the standard 5-point scale, you know, where you go from strongly agree to strongly disagree, but they used different words, and so they were able to make a 3 into a positive, and when they present the results, it's all grouped together as though it hadn't been a differentiated response, and the residents had no input into what the questions are. So it really wasn't too useful for residents, and I'm not sure that it's really useful for guiding providers who want to serve resident needs and want to make the facility attractive to prospective residents by making it an attractive place to live. But that's another matter. So we took a different approach. First, we recognized that we could not generate a scientific survey. So the survey is no more than what it is on its face. It's a compilation of the responses of those residents who respond. Roughly 1/3 of our residents don't respond. This is much lower than the statistic that the provider has from their professionally developed survey. But then we just put the survey out there and let the residents complete it. We gave no incentives for completing it. The provider, if you do your survey, you're in the drawing, you may get a dinner, etc. We didn't put out a memo. The provider puts out a memo a week before the survey touting all the wonderful things that have happened to be sure that the residents have that in mind and know how the survey should be completed. So we thought these were things that undermined the integrity of the existing survey that we could maintain by having a resident-developed survey on our own. So our survey is no more than representative of the views of those residents who were self-motivated enough to complete it and who took the time to do it on their own. Second, we adopted some principles to guide our process. We wanted to sample opinion in a way that could enable management to respond constructively. So we had that set of positive principles which you saw, and we did that somewhat imperfectly the first year, did a little better this year. We're learning. We adopted a neutral stance. Questions were carefully phrased to avoid any semblance of advocacy, any semblance of anybody's pet peeve. Questions were positively phrased even for items of considerable controversy. And we had trouble with that in the first year, but we learned. We tried to avoid ambiguity, but some ambiguity is appropriate. And the example we gave with the luxury dining, the marketing brochure promised luxury dining. So we asked, do you feel you have luxury dining? Well, for the most part, people do feel they have luxury dining. That's a really good advertisement for the community. Still, some ambiguity, yes or no, has been a challenge for us, and Corrine already addressed that. We also found that length was a factor. We thought it wasn't too much to ask people to do a 2-page survey. Well, you'd be surprised how people can complain about a 2-page survey. So this year, we boiled it down to a single page, and that took a lot of advanced work. Maybe I should tell you that in the first year, we developed this through a workshop. We started out with a workshop that residents were invited to come to, and we were going to do some brainstorming to get some ideas for the resident council on things that people might want. And we underestimated the generation we were addressing. So we started out with a listening exercise. Now, those of you in the room who are under 70 have probably participated in listening exercises. So what we did was we had people pair off, and each person told the things they wanted to the other person, who was then going to write them on big Post-its, and we were going to put that up on the board, one on a sheet, so we could prioritize things. And the idea was that in the pairs, one person would have to listen to the other to be able to say that person's ideas. And this is a common listening exercise that people use today. Well, didn't quite work that way. We did the pairing off, and they didn't do the talking. They just took the sheets and wrote down their ideas. And as one fellow said, why do I have to explain to Sam what I think when I can speak for myself? Why am I doing this? And they put all their ideas down on one sheet because they knew their ideas were the right ones and no need to prioritize it. They knew what their priorities were. So that really wasn't working. That was sort of what moved us toward using the survey mechanism after that workshop. But the ideas that came up in that workshop were the matters that we probed in the survey. So the questions in the survey are not just somebody's bright idea. This bubbles up. This is a bottom-up exercise to find out what residents are really thinking. Now, for those of you who are interested in the mechanics, and Reverend Bob, I'll email you, but everything is available at cbtsresidence.com, and that's in the handout. But I'll make sure that you get a copy of everything. But anyway, we developed a survey using a simple word template. It's really quite amazing what you can find out there on the internet. We summarized the results using Excel. Now here's where it gets a little tricky. Only one person had access to all the records. And that was, we were really trying hard to maintain the integrity of what we were getting. So we got somebody who everybody trusts, and I particularly trust her because she's my wife, but she is the only one who, to this day, has access to all this information. And we made a decision to record exactly what people put down and not to modify it. So, for example, we asked for demographic information. Somebody put down that they were over age 100. Now, we know that we had nobody over 100 in our community, but we still recorded that faithfully the way they had given it to us. So the survey is not, we don't pretend that it's scientific, it's just the information that people gave us organized in a way that helps facilitate things. Now, I do want to say a word of thanks and admiration for Roberta Jacobson, who's going to speak next, because we developed this survey and then we proposed it. We proposed this panel first to Aging Services of California, and we were turned down there. But ASA was nice enough, and ASA accepted it, and we're really grateful to them because for once now residents begin to have a voice and be part of the family. So that was a wonderful thing. But ASA didn't want us to venture out without parental supervision. So they said they would only allow the panel if we had somebody from the provider organization. And to her credit, Roberta immediately and without hesitation stepped up, and she's sort of put on the spot here because she's not completely aware of what we're going to say. Now she's got to sort of respond, and without the benefit of PowerPoint slides, so I don't know how she's going to do that. But our aim was simply to gain respect for residents and to come into the family. You know, Edward James Olmos the other day spoke of the human family. And Wynne Marshall spoke of the ASA family. And certainly in our community, as you can see, we're a very loving family. And we want to be part of the provider family. So it's all about families. It's all about winning respect. And you only get respect if you ask for it. So we've asked. We hope and believe that the survey has helped to improve our working relationship with the provider organization. And I think you're going to hear from Roberta that it's done just that. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thanks, Jack, for that kind introduction. Our topic this morning is resident empowerment, the key to excellence in aging services. And so I want to begin by acknowledging these residents from Carlsbad by the Sea. I think you'll agree that they truly exemplify the empowerment that we are seeing in this new generation of residents moving into our communities. Their empowerment... And their empowerment is demonstrated, of course, by this survey, which they created, implemented, analyzed, presented, and then, as Jack just described, initiated the request for presentation to ASA. So I want to commend them and the many other residents that we're seeing that are really stepping forward so their voices can be heard. A little bit of background on Front Porch. We do own and operate 11 CCRCs and multi-level retirement communities. We have 2 military base reuse projects. We manage over 40 affordable housing communities with over 2,000 employees and nearly 7,000 residents. So our branding tagline is "Live life your way at a Front Porch And I love that tagline, but in reality, when you have 7,000 residents living in 50 different locations, it is difficult. We have a very diverse resident population, different geographies, different economic levels, and different expectations. That being said, it is critical important. We take it very seriously, resident empowerment, listening to residents and involving residents, not just through maybe your standard resident committees, but with a genuine ear to the ground in terms of what residents have on their minds, empowering them and involving them in decision making, and then of course following up and implementing the appropriate changes that they bring forth. Regarding the resident satisfaction surveys, just to kind of bring that full loop, we do an annual resident satisfaction survey not only with assisted living residents, independent living residents, and their families, and that's done through Service Track. Maybe some of you use that corporation. And then in our skilled nursing communities, we use My Interview. As a large multi-home organization, of course, this allows us to have standardized benchmarking against national databases. And so we've probably been with those firms 5 or 6 years. We not only can trend Front Porch's results on resident satisfaction surveys, but we can compare ourselves, of course, against other communities, hundreds of other retirement communities across the country. So we can establish standardized benchmarks and indexing to really, we feel, objectively measure our progress. The disadvantage of these surveys, as was mentioned, of course, is it's difficult to customize the questions. Once you've modified or customized any individual questions, there's some invalidation of the results, and it makes it a little more difficult to compare those on a national basis. I'm sure for most of you who do these kinds of surveys, you share those results with not only your staff, but your residents. You have meetings, you communicate the results of the surveys, and you try to make appropriate changes. But as we find when we present those results of the standardized surveys, the residents are most important about what's going on in their own individual community. How are the results of this survey going to affect their lives, and what changes are we going to make to really ensure the success of the home where they live? And of course, by way of example, the Carlsbad residents took it upon themselves, to initiate a survey that really went under the covers a little bit to focus on issues, remodeling, food, that were specifically of concern to them. This communication helps us in the next remodeling project, as Corinne mentioned, to hopefully improve the results of that project and the acceptance of it. Also, we have improved and tried to expand the documentation and transparency of our financial reporting. That was another issue that came up in the Carlsbad specific resident survey. So I think it's especially important for those of you who are in large multi-home organizations that you do have an eye and an ear to this resident empowerment issues. Jack mentioned the silent generation, this generation of residents who is between the baby boomers and the GIs that is not only on our doorsteps but moving into our communities. The silent generation wants to be heard. They want to be involved in their lives. I almost think it's a misnomer that they're called the silent generation. In my experience, they're really not that very silent. But they want to be heard and involved in management decisions, operational decisions, and fully understanding the financial conditions of the community. And in closing, I was reflecting on our employee training focus for this coming year, which is spirit of the individual, strength of the community. And certainly I think this is applicable to our residents, as the individual resident spirit can contribute in so many ways to the strength of their community. Thank you. At this time, I think we'll take questions.
Thank you. Thanks, Roberta. Have we stunned you sufficiently? We need questions from you. We're glad to take them, glad to answer them. Yes?
Is the takeaway from this session that those of us in CCRCs that have management-driven surveys done independent of resident association councils to say thank you to management for your efforts, but we will also do our survey that grows out of our community and our needs and our issues to get a better picture of what we need to do going forward.
The question was, in addition to the management-driven surveys, do we really need these resident surveys to find out what's going on? Somebody on the Mary Beth would like to answer.
I think one of the things that really can be helpful is as a guide to the resident council or the organization of residents so that they have good concrete information to work on. I think we all get to the point where we say, if it's, I know what I think, but we forget that there are a lot of other people who don't have the same thought. And I think this is what helps in a survey. What are the issues that the resident council should be doing? I think that's an important thing. And then working with their executive director or their direct line of management, you can bring about a change if that's needed of a cooperative effort.
Jack wanted to add to that?
Well,
no.
Yeah, let me try. Hi. Yeah, have you all met Reverend Bob? He's moved into a facility in the state of Washington, and he's in the process of organizing a residents association in Washington. An outstanding gentleman, and he's I don't know how long you've been retired, but just I think recently retired as a Presbyterian clergyman. But I think the question depends on each individual community and how things are, and there may be some communities where there's more involvement directly in that provider survey, or you may have different issues. It's a question whether there are issues or there are not. I think one of the things, aging people can be high maintenance, and part of that is that they begin to see the world in terms of their own opinion. And one of the things that we did with this survey was to make it clear that there was diversity of opinion within our community, and that had the surprising effect of bringing people closer together. Instead of sort of badgering each other, they said, oh, well, it's like saying, now I understand, you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. And so that's why you have that idea. So it can be a very positive and healing thing to help strengthen the sense of community.
Yes.
I would like to add this thought now of cooperation and how you come together by working on this. I wish I had better memory right now of our survey at Ingleside at Rock Creek in D.C. We were fortunate in having a resident who in fact had professionally done surveys. So the whole development of our survey was one of cooperation with management and among residents, so that the development of the survey took some time in workshopping together in small groups with residents to develop the survey questions, and also with management. It was cooperative throughout. I would like to suggest, being somewhat older than you, Jack, a lot more older than I even realized, that in World War II we didn't really win by taking orders. We won by taking responsibility. And I think that that's a mode that operated well in the development and completion of this survey.
Can everybody hear? Why don't you come up and
I think the point was well made that in World War II we didn't win by taking orders, we won by taking responsibility. And that is what many of us in our generation want to do, to help, to be allowed to help, and not to be put to one side and simply done for.
We worked through it all the way through.
Yes. Come forward and take the mic. It would be so much easier.
In fact, we don't have a questioner's microphone, but if you're going to have a long question, if you'd come up and use the microphone, that would help a lot.
All of you sitting in the back can't hear her, and it's worth hearing her.
It's not a question. It's just.
Tell them who you are.
Yeah.
I'm Lynn Dysart. I'm the new secretary of NACRA. But I was very interested in this wonderful survey we've heard about and how helpful it has been to Carlsbad by the Sea. I wish I knew more, I had a better recollection, rather, of the survey we did at Ingleside at Rock Creek, very much together with management. The leader in it was a resident who had professionally developed surveys. So together with management, she established the basic framework, but from there we had workshops of residents working on developing the questions and where to go with the whole thing. Throughout, we worked together with management, but essentially it was resident-driven and driven to in completion. We had, I'm happy to say, close to full response. In other words, I think we had about 95% of the residents respond. In the health center, where they couldn't respond for themselves, management identified those who would like to participate, even though they might be very frail and bedridden, and then assigned residents with instruction on how to communicate adequately to get some sense of their input. So all in all, at the end, I think it was a very useful exercise for the residents in taking responsibility for thoughtfully framing the question and responding to it for a positive cooperative result. And I think it was very helpful. We had the understanding from management that they found it very helpful in framing their plans. So it was kind of lucky we had that resident who had this experience.
Yep. It was indeed. Thank you, Lynn. There's another question over here.
Well, before we do that, I just want to say that I meant no disrespect to our veterans, and we have Walt Rosette and Jack Matheson here, both from the 8th Air Force. Jack, who spent the last years of the war in the company of the Germans as their guest, and I believe it was not Stalag, Luft. Yeah, so he was a guest of the Luftwaffe. So we do appreciate everything that we owe to your generation, believe me.
Yes.
I have just a short comment. I, too, have done a lot of surveying around employees in an industrial place. I think there's probably a value in both kinds of surveys. One, these folks are told about what it means on the micro level in managing a particular facility. But it's also important to know how you're doing on a state level and on a national level. So good surveys at both levels are important to management and to the residents.
Yes, the point is that he says that good surveys at both levels, the management level and the individual facility, the resident level, are important, and we fully concur. We understand why the generalities, for example, are asked, because you can't ask specifically, do you like your lobby redecoration, to every community in the United States who haven't had lobby redecorations. Yes.
I'd like to go back to the point about personal responsibility.
Joe, I wonder if it wouldn't be good to come up.
Okay, Joe is going to come up and make his voice heard on the recording by putting the microphone to his mouth.
We may get more auditors from the recording than any other way.
Thank you, Jack. I want to go back to the point about personal responsibility. And at my CCRC, when I chaired the Residents Health Services Committee, we constantly received complaints about not getting this service or that service. And it occurred after a while that the residents had the idea, many of them did, that when they came into the community, all of their health care needs were taken care of, and they didn't have to worry about anything. In fact, their responsibility for primary care remained with the residents. And so we try to encourage personal responsibility to take the time to read your residence and care agreement and understand what is covered and what is not covered. Well, when we did that, we discovered that when the residents attempted to do that, read their residence and care agreement, they found it difficult to understand. And in all due respect to the lawyers, a lot of these documents are written in legalese. So what we did, the Health Services Committee crafted a handbook for residents that explained the benefits that they were eligible for when they came into the community, and we did it in layperson's language. The council funded the entire cost of developing the booklet. The residents authored the booklet and worked closely with administration in the process. So my question is, are there other ways in which you all or our panelists have taken steps to encourage personal responsibility in their community? Thank you.
Oh, all right. Anybody got an answer for that in the audience? No? How about up here on the panel? Mary Beth.
Reverend Bob, here, come.
Oh, yes, all right.
We have a modest little community in Seattle called Mirabella, which is Italian for beautiful vision. And the health care delivery system in this CCRC was in trouble. And I'm forbidden by management threats to say what the trouble was, lest lightning strike. But suffice it to say, it was in trouble, and the director of the health center was fired. The model was that management knew what had to be done and did it independent of the residents. Mirabella consists of a few people like the retired dean of the School of Medicine at the University of Washington, the retired dean of the School of Nursing, a geriatric PhD nurse, the retired dean of the School of Dentistry, the president of the University of Washington. A few little people like that were kind of hanging around and saying, you know, you got to do something. And the breakthrough was that for the first time in the history of Mirabella, and I think for the here's where lightning may really strike, and for the first time in the history of PRS, 3 residents were involved in their interview of candidates to become the director of the health center. To say, this is our health center, we're in this together, we have some modest degree of experience in this arena, and we need to be heard.
Yes, Walt says.
I'd like to add to that.
Yes.
I think that you've touched on a real point, because I briefly said in the resident group within any of the communities, there are people with real skills. And as an administrator, I found that when I could identify these people in the organization who had real skills, they made me look wonderful because I use those skills to help me. And I think all of us, as we work, and the really highly skilled people know the bounds. They know not to go off and on their own, but to work with the group. And I think it's a gold mine that sometimes it's kind of like dropping a pebble in a pond. You make yourself much more effective when you use the people who have the skills to be able to help you do the task or the challenge that you're working on.
While Walt Rosette is coming forward to the microphone, I will say we don't want to run the place. We just want to be consulted along the way. And we want our skills used because they are or could be useful to you, we think. Walt?
Yeah, well, this is Bill Root here.
Bill.
Yeah.
Oh, Bill.
But he looks a little like Walt, and I don't think Walt would be offended. But I wanted to say
Bill Root from Maryland.
Bill before he speaks. Bill Root is a retired Foreign Service officer, and he's very diplomatic, and he looks the part. And he's about to speak to you. And he was an economic development officer and a budget officer in the State Department. He understands finances at a very sharp level, and he's also president of the Maryland Continuing Care Residents Association.
To prove how diplomatic he is, he didn't even wince when I called him by Walt Rosette's name.
Before all that, I was in the Navy, and there's documentary proof based on efficiency ratings that 95% of the naval officers, at least at my time, are above average. Now, this is not surprising because not only in a mythical town in Minnesota, but I think we all believe, we really want to believe, we really do believe that all the children, not just 95%, are above average. Now, this has relevance to the height of the green bars on the chart. I think any survey which asks, do you think things are okay? Well, I was about to fill out the evaluation form for this session before it began because these are all my friends, including not only the residents but the management staff, and I'm sure they're doing the best they can, and so I give them all excellent. But it doesn't mean a thing, of course. I believe some of the innovative factors in what you've been doing recognize this. I don't mean to sell you short, but it seems to me that a survey, to be of any use, has got to identify not things in a negative sense, things that need to be improved. We know everything in life, no matter how good it is, can be a little bit better with some improvement. Now, once you've identified that, it's not enough. You've got to say how you would improve it, and even that's not enough. You've got to recognize the downside of your own recommendation. It's tricky, but until that is the focus of a survey, I don't think it really serves much purpose.
Thank you. Yes, you've been aching to say something. Come on up.
This is Jack Matheson, a retired Presbyterian minister and a senior member of the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church in Washington, D.C.
I'd be interested in knowing if those that were developing the survey were sensitive as to how well are we reaching a broad cross-section of society. Does Front Porch, as represented in Carlsbad by the Sea, want to reach just middle-upper income, or are they equally concerned about reaching middle-lower income? Are we offering adequate studio apartments? That's where I choose to live, at Thomas Circle, and find that we need, across the country, CCRCs are coming under judgment of only reaching middle-upper income. And I think it's high time we increased our sensitivity to middle-lower income. Fortunately, there are many that are cooperating with HUD. A beautiful example is a Lutheran-sponsored facility in southwestern Pennsylvania that have beautiful cottages for middle-upper income, but in the middle of their compound, and cooperating with HUD, they have a beautiful new apartment building, 1 and 2 bedroom, for those with a maximum income of $39,750. And I wonder to what extent, as you were developing the survey, you were inquiring of your residents how well or how adequately we're thinking of a larger spectrum of society.
I'd like to speak to that.
Mary Beth will answer.
In order to meet the need of the people who do not have as much to be able to buy in to the larger apartments, our facility, when we first opened, and it was 12 years ago when it was rebuilt, there were a number of small, single, what I would call a studio apartments, and they were basically guest rooms, most of them. Almost all of those have been sold to people who are able to come in at a much lower rate than they would pay for a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom, and they have all 3 meals included in their monthly fee, where the rest of us have 1 meal. So they are within the bounds of a fairly small community. But Roberta can speak for Front Porch's emphasis.
Yeah, in addition to Roberta's hats that you've heard this morning, she also is involved with Caring Ministries.
Yeah. As I mentioned in my presentation, Front Porch manages 41 affordable housing communities. We actually serve 4,000 residents, low-income seniors, families, residents with disabilities. So, and that services nearly 4,000 residents. So we actually have more residents in our low-income affordable housing than we do in our market rate housing. But even on the market rate side, we serve over 100 SSI residents in our market rate communities. And as Mary Beth mentioned, we are actually finding a trend toward busting up the larger accommodations that we expanded years ago to make 2- and 3-bedroom accommodations back down to studios and 1-bedrooms. And yes, we do survey all of those residents, the residents in affordable housing, the residents in our military base reuse, as well as our market rate residents are included in our annual resident satisfaction survey.
There's a question back there. Question back there. The lady, yes, you're the one. Come on forward. It'll be so much easier.
Forward. It's easier to hear, too.
It's easier for the people who are recording this, and it's easier for everybody in the audience to hear.
And these barn-sized rooms are a challenge.
I'm sorry you can't introduce me because you don't know me.
But it's good to meet you.
I'm very briefly, I'm Fran Wenger. I am part of the silent generation. I do not live in a CCRC, but I am on the board of directors for Greencroft Goshen in Indiana. And I have first a comment and then a question regarding the pre-work of the survey. You talked about paired listening, and I hope you consider going back to paired listening again. The point of paired listening is listening, and the ability to write down a list of what you think your ideas are is not necessarily understood. So it requires developing listening skills, because we in resident empowerment, you want others to understand what you want and what you think, and therefore you must help people to develop their listening skills, and that takes some work in developing that. That's my comment. Now I have a question. This session is about resident empowerment, and I believe in it so much. I want to do everything I can on the board that I serve to see that it happens more and more. Interestingly, on the board of directors at Greencroft Goshen, there is a resident member of the board. In fact, it was the resident member who nominated me to come onto the board, and I thank him for that opportunity. I also want to ask you now, is that usual, or is that common? And secondly, how many of you residents here were sent by your organization? In this audience is Dale Stutzman, who is part of the resident council at Goshen Greencroft Goshen, and he and his wife are brought here, paid for by the organization, by the CCRC. That, to me, is also part of resident empowerment. Is that usual? Is it unusual?
I can answer about the Board of Trustees. The front porch has a board of trustees, a board of directors. I'm talking academic talk when I say Board of Trustees. A board of directors, and every resident council president is a member of that board. By state law, they would have to have only 3 of the 11. But Front Porch has opted to have all 11 resident council presidents as members of the board.
I don't think they're actually members of the board. I think they are representatives to the board and permitted to speak and be.
They're called members. They are non-voting members, but they are speaking members.
Okay. But I did want to respond to your listening thing. You know, we think that the biggest advance in the last 20 years or so has been the advent of personal computers and iPhones and that. But there's also been a tremendous advance in social skills. And most of the residents living in retirement communities today retired before the teaching of those social skills was common in the workplace. So they're encountering it for the first time. And I'll take the rap for that because I tried to facilitate it, and I assumed, and Mary Beth just said you didn't do very well. So she
they're in utter frustration.
So Mary Beth probably would have done it much better, but we tried, and I think that that's true. Perhaps I assumed that people would grasp better what it was we were asking them to do, but we did listen to them, and they got to talk in the larger group. So listening skills are very valuable to develop.
The points on the survey were entirely resident-generated from that meeting. They were points that the residents had brought up, and they were translated into positive statements, as we said. Yes.
I'm Bill Nye from Galloway Ridge in North Carolina. We're an independent community. I congratulate your Residents Council for being very able to work with your executive director. Mine is a little bit dysfunctional. I was the first chair of the Resident Council back in 2006. In 2008, I was put on the board, and now I'm chairman of the board. I can vote. We have 25% of our board are voting members. Now, I read an interesting article in Future Age, I think it was last October, that talked about surveying boards. And your discussion today says that I need to convince our resident council to evaluate themselves. And it might be a good exercise for a lot of communities to do that. The article in Future Age was published by the Jewish communities, and I don't remember how many, but it's a big organization. We are a standalone. I took that survey and modified it for our board, and I think we have made good progress with the board. We found out a lot about ourselves. We found a lot about how we need to work with our executive director. We didn't find out much about how we should work with the residents, but they have a big voice. The other thing that I think that I have done with our board is to develop a matrix of skills. And I think you could develop a matrix of skills. You've got one pretty well already, but if you develop your own and then you try to recruit people to a resident council that have a mix of skills, banking, insurance, health, management, I think it's a great thing to do, and I'm using that. And to find the people that have those talents that we want, we have just developed a survey of all of our residents asking them to list their talents. That list is going to be in the library and on index cards for the management to use to find people that can do jobs.
How large a community is yours?
We have, right now, 183 apartments, 50 villas. We are adding 67 new apartments, expanding dining services and a whole bunch of other things. We broke ground Wednesday on that development, got good support from our State Medical Care Commission for bonds and good support from BB&T to do it.
Yeah. Other questions? Yes, now Walt Rosette, would the real Walt Rosette will please come forward to the microphone?
8th Air Force.
Yes, I'm the real Walt Rosette, and I did fly a B-17 in World War II. And I'm more importantly was president of CalCRA until last month, and I've been promoted to vice president. And that after 7 years is a joy. If you look at an organization like, well, as a matter of fact, let me start looking at CCRCs in general. Whether this figure is scientific or not doesn't make any difference, but about 80% of the residents in CCRCs are passive. They elect a resident council that is representative in a democracy of the people who elect them. And consequently, in my experience around California, most CCRCs have resident councils that tend to spend most of their time getting along with management. Now that doesn't necessarily produce the real thoughts of those members of the community who really have something to contribute on the basis of their experience. I was a chief financial officer during my working life and know a little bit more about finance than the accountants that we have working in our organization. The purpose behind CalCRA was started in 1995 by a fellow at the place called the Sequoias. He's still living in Portola Valley, who was dissatisfied with management's approach. They weren't responding. So the organization got established and has been working legislatively to accomplish what needs to be accomplished to ensure the financial security and quality of life of residents. We have exactly the same objective as all of the residents, all of the resident councils, and the providers in making these communities more successful. The surveys should be used in a positive way to identify elements where there is an opportunity for improvement, and that is particularly true in this day and age when there is such difficulty, such financial difficulty created by the housing problems. We're all working in the same direction. We, CalCRA, tend to work through legislation to ensure that the bottom part of the provider organization is going to listen to residents whether they want to or not. We have probably passed a dozen laws that do things like require that there be an appeal process to transfers to higher levels of care, whereas prior to that, in California, the provider had the unilateral authority to simply transfer somebody from one level of care to another. Well, that's not really appropriate, and a good provider wouldn't force a resident to do that, but there are some providers who are not necessarily going to listen. But I think we all have a common interest in ensuring that our community does improve. If it does improve, it's going to improve for not only the existing residents, but it's going to make it much more attractive for the prospective residents. And all of that is terribly important. The positive side is important, and the negative side is important too. You got to identify it and do something to correct it. Thank you.
Thank you, Walt. Other questions? Yes.
Skilled nursing rooms also have private showers in each of them?
Yeah, the answer is no.
Could you repeat the question to be sure that everyone heard it?
Well, I just as soon answer what you said. You asked if the skilled nursing facility was green. It's not. It was built 12 years ago. It was built in a certain way by the architects and planners. It cannot be changed. It can only be improved upon. And we do not have individual showers for some people. Most do, but some do not. The care center is, well, I'll give the best example I can give you. My first wife was quite ill, and I was looking for a nursing facility for her. And having had the experience of working in literally 50 of these things in the city of Los Angeles, I knew how to find out. I took 5 minutes with the head nurse, and I knew exactly where I wanted her to be, and that was in the skilled nursing facility. of Carlsbad by the Sea. It isn't the facility, it's the people who are working in the facility that make a facility good. You can have many of these skilled nursing facilities, particularly in the Lutheran home situation, are very old, and they don't have any of this. And I don't think that's necessary in order to have a good nursing center, as proven by what I said. The interview organization put us in the top 10% in the country, and I think that's just fine. Our next goal is to improve the assisted living, to make it a outpatient clinic for the independent livers. I hope that answers it.
We have a comment down here.
I just wanted to add a very minor thing, but I think it'll make the point, and that is that when I was first at Carlsbad by the Sea, there are people who have to have special needs and go to a communal shower in the care center, and I won't spell out the mechanics of that, but I think you're all familiar with it. And they complained that the water was cold. Now, can you imagine looking forward to the rest of your life having nothing but a cold shower? And we got a new executive director, and he made that a priority. And somehow, I'm not quite sure how, because the boiler's way down in the basement, but I understand that now they have warm showers. It's amazing what a difference in your well-being having a warm shower can make.
Yes, we have a question right here in front.
I just want to respond to the question the lady asked, how many residents here were sent by their administration. I'm sorry, I didn't identify first when I first got up here. My name is Joe Walton. I live in the retirement community in the Hartford area, Hartford, Connecticut. It's a CCRC. I'm finishing up my second term on the board of directors. There are two resident directors on the board. They have voting rights, and a portion of my cost attending here is paid by Seabury Management. Thank you.
Applause for help with the expenses.
I'd just like to say we all paid our own way here, all of us from Carlsbad by the Sea. But it was close. We didn't have to fly.
Yeah.
And ASA was nice enough to pick up the registration fee, and that's a substantial number. And had we had to pay that, that might have been a fatal barrier to our participating in this session.
Yes, you have a question, Ruth.
Yeah, Ruth, why don't you come up and introduce yourself? This is Ruth Walsh.
I am Ruth Walsh, also from Connecticut, from Mystic, and I'm president of the Connecticut, of what we call CONCRA, the Connecticut Continuing Care Residents Association. I just had a question on the survey. Were there spaces for comments, for commendations, and this sort of thing, and how did you handle all of that, those complexities?
Oops. Okay. The question was about the spaces. This year, since it's one page, the whole backside was available for comments. But Valerie, would you be too shy to come up and explain what you did with the comments? They weren't lost, but this is my wife Valerie, who was the one trusted keeper of these documents.
Doesn't she look trustworthy?
Okay, thank you, everybody. I kept track of everything. I wrote it down. I have a spreadsheet, but I also have a separate spreadsheet with the comment keyed to the actual number of the questionnaire. We don't have names, obviously, but I did number everything, and so we can, if we want to, go back and compare them, and they're available, well, for anybody who really wants to see the comments. We've got them. Any more?
That should be finished for the session, but we're here, and you can come up and ask us questions individually if you like. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My name is Corrine Sawyer. This is 086-D, Resident Empowerment.